Story number 1. The delivery that no one ordered. I've been doing delivery driving for about 3 years. Not full time, I do it on weekends mostly, sometimes a Thursday evening if I need extra money. I drive for 2 different apps depending on which one has better promos running. It's fine work. Repetitive but fine. You learn pretty quickly that most of the job is just waiting and that the actual drop-offs are usually 30 seconds of human interaction at most before you're back in your car and on to the next one. I say that so you understand that I've done hundreds of these, maybe closer to 1,000 over 3 years. I know the difference between a weird drop-off and a genuinely wrong one. What happened on a Friday night in November was the second kind. The order came in around 9:40 p.m., Thai food, 1 entree, 1 soup, a drink. Picked it up from a place I'd been to before, no issues. The delivery address was a residential street about 11 minutes away. Older neighborhood, the kind with big trees that hang over the road and make it darker than it should be at night. I've delivered to that street before. Nothing notable about it. The specific house was set back from the road a little further than its neighbors. Long narrow driveway, no garage, 1 light on inside, looked like it was coming from the back of the house. Front porch light was off. I parked, grabbed the bag, walked up, knocked. Standard stuff, nobody came. I waited, knocked again, a little louder. The app gives customers 3 minutes before you can mark it as undeliverable and leave the food at the door. I wasn't in a hurry, so I waited the full time, knocked once more at the 2-minute mark. The door opened before I could finish knocking. Not all the way, maybe 10 inches, enough to see a slice of the entryway. Dark inside, no lights on in the front of the house, and a man standing there. Older, maybe mid-60s, wearing a collared shirt like he'd been out somewhere earlier. He looked at me, not at the bag. At me, I said I had a delivery, held up the bag so he could see it. He said, and I'm going to quote this as accurately as I can, I didn't order anything. I checked the app. Right address, right house number. Name on the order was listed as D. Marlowe. I asked if that was him. He looked at the bag for the first time. Something happened in his expression that I can't fully describe. It wasn't confusion exactly. It was more like he was recalculating something. He said quietly, my wife orders sometimes. She might have. He paused. She passed in March. I didn't know what to say to that. I said I was sorry, and I meant it. He took the bag. I walked back to my car. Here's where I should have just driven away. I was writing up the delivery in the app, still parked, when I looked up and noticed the front door was still open. The man was standing in the doorway, holding the bag, looking at something to the left of my car, not at me, not at the street, at something off to the side that I couldn't see from where I was sitting. His expression was completely blank. I looked left, there was nothing there. Just the edge of his yard where it met the neighbor's hedge, dark and completely still. When I looked back at the doorway, he had stepped back inside and the door was closed. I sat there for another minute before I drove away, and I cannot tell you exactly why. Something about the way he was looking at that spot. The total stillness of him. I've delivered to houses in worse neighborhoods at worse hours, and I've never felt the need to just sit and make sure a door was closed. I reported the order as a possible app error when I got home. Duplicate address, wrong account, something technical. The support team closed the ticket and said the order had been placed from a registered account. I looked up the name D. Marlowe more out of curiosity than anything else. I found an obituary from the previous spring. Donna Marlowe. The address matched. She'd ordered from that Thai place regularly, according to a comment on her memorial page that mentioned it was her favorite. The account hadn't been deactivated, and someone from that account had placed an order 9 months after she died. I don't do that street anymore. I mark it as out of my zone when it comes up. I know there's probably an explanation, a family member using the account, a scheduled order, some kind of app error. I know that, but I keep thinking about what he was looking at. The way he stood there, completely still, looking at something in the dark at the edge of his yard, like he recognized it, like he'd seen it standing there before. Story number 2. What the pest control guy found in the walls. I did pest control for 6 years. Residential mostly, some commercial. It is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. You spend a lot of time in crawl spaces and attics and behind appliances, and you see things that would make most people never want to own a house. Dead animals in wall cavities. Insulation that hasn't been touched since 1987. Gaps in the foundation the size of a paperback book that nobody noticed for 40 years. You get used to it. You develop a very high threshold for what counts as surprising. This happened in my 4th year, late summer. I was doing a routine inspection at a house that had put in a call about mice. Detached house, 2 stories, older construction, probably built sometime in the 60s based on the layout. A woman in her late 30s lived there with 2 kids. She'd moved in about 4 months before. She seemed tired in the way that people seem tired when they've been dealing with a problem for a while and aren't sure anyone is going to take them seriously. She said she'd been hearing sounds in the walls since about 3 weeks after she moved in, scratching mostly. Sometimes what she described as tapping. She called the landlord twice and he'd sent someone out who looked around for 20 minutes and told her it was probably squirrels in the attic and that he'd put up some mesh. She didn't think it was squirrels. I started the inspection from the attic down, which is standard. Attic had some old droppings, looked like mice, not recent, and a gap near the north eave that something had been using as an entry point, but nothing active. I resealed it, made a note, moved down to the main floor. The sound was in the kitchen wall, the wall that backed onto the neighbor's property. Exterior wall, no windows on that side. I put my hand flat against it in a few places, and I could feel it more than hear it. Not scratching, more like pressure, intermittent. I told the woman I was going to need to check the exterior of that wall, and she walked me around outside. The siding on that side of the house was older than the rest, different material, patched in places. And about 2 feet up from the foundation there was a section, maybe 18 inches wide, where the siding had been replaced at some point and not quite matched. The gap between the old and new material wasn't sealed properly. Big enough to get a few fingers through. I crouched down to look at it and immediately smelled something I recognized. Confined space smell, warm, a little organic, the way a space smells when something's been living in it. I got my flashlight and looked through the gap. The cavity between the exterior siding and the interior drywall of that kitchen wall was bigger than it should have been. In normal construction, there's insulation there, maybe 4 to 6 inches of space. This gap looked closer to 14 or 15 inches, like the interior wall had been built in from the original exterior by almost a foot, without any obvious reason for it. And in that space there was a mattress pad, folded in half old, the kind of thin foam pad you'd put under a sleeping bag. Next to it, a plastic bag, the reusable grocery kind. Inside the bag, from what I could see, a water bottle, a phone charging cable, and what looked like a food wrapper. I stood up. I did not go back through the gap. I told the woman calmly that I needed to make a call, and I walked back to my van. I called my supervisor first, which in retrospect I should not have done before calling the police, but I wasn't thinking clearly. My supervisor told me to call the police, which I then did. 2 officers came out. They pulled the loose siding section away from the exterior. It came off in one piece. It had been refastened from the inside, which none of us realized until it was already off, and found the full cavity. The mattress pad, the bag, a second bag further back with more items in it, and a series of small holes drilled through the interior drywall at roughly eye level when lying down. The holes were positioned to see directly into the kitchen. Nobody was in the cavity when the police searched it. No signs of how recently it had been occupied. The landlord, when contacted, said he had no knowledge of the modified wall and that the previous tenant had done extensive interior work that he'd never fully inspected. The woman moved out within 2 weeks. I don't blame her for a single second. I've been in hundreds of wall cavities and crawl spaces. I've found dead animals and water damage and structural problems that should have been caught decades earlier. I have never found anything that made me feel the specific way I felt when I stood up from that gap and processed what I had just seen. Someone had built themselves a space inside that house. They had furnished it. They had drilled holes to watch the kitchen, and they had been there, based on the items in that bag, for a while. Story number 3. My last ride as an Uber driver. I drove for Uber for about 2 years while I was finishing my degree. Weekend nights mainly, occasionally a Friday. It's decent money if you don't mind the hours, and you learn very quickly to read people the moment they get in the car. Not in a judgmental way, just practically. You figure out within About 30 seconds, whether someone wants to talk or wants silence, whether they're drunk happy or drunk difficult, whether the ride is going to be fine or whether you're going to be thinking about it afterward. I got pretty good at reading people. That's what made the last ride different. Because I couldn't read him at all. This was on a Saturday night in February, around 1:20 in the morning. I'd been out since about 9 p.m. I was running one last ride before calling it a night. Pick up from a bar in the downtown area. Drop off listed as a residential address about 16 minutes out. The guy who got in was completely sober. I noticed that immediately because at 1:20 a.m. from a bar it's unusual. Mid-40s, plain jacket, nothing remarkable. He said hi, sat in the back directly behind my seat, which I've always disliked and can't do anything about, and looked out the window. I asked how his night was. He said fine. One word. Okay, silent rider. I've had thousands of those. I turned the music down a little and focused on the drive. About 7 minutes in, completely unprompted, he said, "You always work this late?" I said, "Yeah." Weekend nights were usually my longest shift. He said, "You pick up a lot of people by yourself, late at night." Not a question, just a statement. The phrasing of it sat in the air for a second. I said something like, "Yeah, that's kind of the job." Tried to keep my tone normal. He didn't say anything else for about 3 minutes. Then, "Do you ever get nervous?" I said no, not usually, met a lot of interesting people, which was my standard deflection answer for personal questions during rides. "You learn to give answers that close conversations without being rude?" He said, "You probably should." I didn't respond. I was watching the road, and I was also very aware of where my phone was, mounted on the dash, visible, the app open with the route on screen. I was aware that the drop-off was still 9 minutes away, and that we were on a road with not much on either side of it. I changed the route slightly, not obviously, just took a turn that added about 90 seconds, but put us back on a more populated road. I do not know if he noticed. The rest of the ride he was completely silent. He didn't look at his phone, he just looked out the window. I watched him in the mirror when I could without making it obvious, and I couldn't find a single thing to anchor him to. No bag, no indication of why he'd been at a bar sober at 1 a.m., nothing. I pulled up to the drop-off. House at the end of a cul-de-sac, no lights on. He got out, leaned back into the car before closing the door and said, "Get home, safe." And he walked to the house and went inside. I sat there for a moment. Then I drove away. Here is the thing that I cannot rationalize, no matter how many times I replay it. When I got home and looked at the ride in the app, checking my earnings before I went to bed, which I always did, the drop-off address on the completed ride was different from the one I drive into, not by a lot. 3 streets over, different cul-de-sac. The app showed the ride as completed at the correct listed address. I had dropped him off at a house that wasn't his destination. Either he'd changed the drop-off mid-ride without telling me and the app glitched on my end, or he directed me, through complete silence, to a house that wasn't attached to his account. I reported it through the app. I got a standard automated response about GPS discrepancies. I stopped driving the following week, told myself it was because my schedule was getting busy, which was partly true. I've thought about those 3 sentences a lot. You pick up a lot of people by yourself late at night. Do you ever get nervous? You probably should. Maybe he was socially off. Maybe it was a weird attempt at dark humor from someone who didn't read the room. Maybe the address thing was genuinely a technical error. I've sat with strangers in my car at 1 in the morning more times than I can count, and not one of them ever made me quietly change my route just to stay near streetlights. That was my last ride. I don't think I'll go back.